The wrench slipped from Mike's oil-stained fingers as he watched the sleek BMW pull into his modest repair shop. Behind the wheel sat a woman whose designer clothes seemed as out of place in his small town as a diamond in a toolbox. Her manicured hands gripped the steering wheel with the desperation of someone whose perfect world had just hit a very real pothole. The engine sputtered once, twice, then died with a mechanical sigh that echoed through the quiet afternoon. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the cracked concrete, and for a moment their eyes met. His weathered by years of struggle, hers bright with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to worry about the cost of tomorrow. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying that particular blend of politeness and urgency that Mike had learned to recognize in customers who weren't used to needing help. "I don't suppose you could take a look at this thing?" Mike Thompson wiped his hands on the red shop rag that had seen better days, much like everything else in his life. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had learned to find purpose in small victories. The afternoon sun streamed through the grimy windows of Thompson's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where his 8-year-old son Tommy sat cross-legged, assembling a toy car with focused concentration. The shop smelled of motor oil and old coffee. It wasn't much to look at, but it was theirs. Mike had bought the place 3 years ago with what little savings he had left after the divorce. Before that, he'd been a different man entirely. A software engineer, working late nights and dreaming of algorithms instead of carburetors. But life had a way of redirecting your path when you least expected it. Tommy looked up from his toys as the BMW's engine gave its final wheeze. "Dad, that car sounds sick," he said with the matter-of-fact observation that children excelled at. Mike nodded, already reaching for his diagnostic tools. The woman who emerged from the BMW looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her navy blazer was perfectly tailored, her dark hair pulled back with effortless style. She was maybe 30, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of a life where the biggest worry was whether to vacation in Tuscany or the Hamptons. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she continued, glancing around the modest shop. "I was driving through town when it just stopped. I have a meeting tomorrow morning in Hartford, and I really can't afford to be stranded." She paused. "I mean, I can pay whatever it costs to fix it quickly." Mike found himself studying her face, noting the slight tension around her eyes that suggested this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a genuine problem that had knocked her off balance. "Let me take a look," he said, popping the hood. "Tommy, grab me the flashlight." The boy scrambled to help, proud to be included in his father's work. As Mike leaned over the engine, he could sense the woman hovering nearby, her expensive perfume mixing oddly with the shop's mechanical atmosphere. "Looks like your alternator's gone," Mike said after a few minutes. "That's why she died on you. Good news is it's fixable. Bad news is I'll need to order the part, and it won't be here until Thursday at the earliest." He straightened up, noting how her shoulders sagged. "You're welcome to call around to other shops, but most will tell you the same thing." The woman pulled out her phone, then sighed and slipped it back into her purse. "No signal," she muttered. "Is there a hotel in town?" Mike exchanged a glance with Tommy. Millbrook wasn't exactly a destination town. "There's Patterson's place about 2 blocks down Main Street," Mike said. "But I should warn you, it's not exactly what you're probably used to." For the first time since she'd arrived, the woman smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Right now I'd settle for clean sheets and working Wi-Fi," she said. "I'm Sophia, by the way, Sophia Sterling. Mike Thompson. And this is my son Tommy." The boy waved shyly from behind the workbench. "It's nice to meet you both," Sophia said. "I really appreciate your help." As she gathered her things from the BMW, Mike found himself wondering about the life she was returning to, about the responsibilities that weighed on her shoulders. "I'll call Patterson's for you," he offered, reaching for the landline. "Thank you," Sophia said, and there was genuine gratitude in her voice. Tommy had returned to his toy cars, but Mike noticed he kept glancing up at Sophia with innocent fascination. As Sophia collected her briefcase, preparing to walk to Patterson's in her impractical heels, Mike made a decision that surprised him. "I could give you a ride if you want. Those shoes weren't exactly designed for small-town sidewalks." Sophia looked down at her designer heels and laughed. "You're probably right about that, if you're sure it's not too much trouble." The drive to Patterson's took exactly 3 minutes, but it was long enough for Mike to learn that Sophia worked in marketing, lived in New York, but traveled frequently for work, and had an unsettling way of looking at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. It was also long enough for him to realize that having her in his truck felt both completely foreign and strangely natural. What would happen next would test everything Mike thought he knew about forgiveness, second chances, and the possibility that sometimes the universe had a sense of humor that bordered on cruel irony. Wednesday morning arrived with crisp October air that made Millbrook look like a postcard. Mike opened the shop early, but found his attention drifting toward Main Street more often than usual. Sophia Sterling had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't quite explain. Around 10:30 the shop door chimed. Mike looked up from Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick, expecting to see one of his regulars, but instead found Sophia standing in the doorway with 2 coffee cups and a paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. She'd traded yesterday's business attire for jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger and more approachable. "I brought breakfast," she announced. "I figured it was the least I could do after you rescued me yesterday." Mike accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that she'd somehow managed to get it exactly right. Black, strong, and hot. The pastry turned out to be a blueberry muffin from the diner, still warm and infinitely better than the stale donuts he usually grabbed for breakfast. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I wanted to," Sophia replied. "Besides, I'm stuck here until Thursday anyway. Might as well make the best of it." She paused. "I called my office this morning and rescheduled everything. Turns out the world doesn't actually end when you miss a few meetings." There was something different about her today. Yesterday's polished professionalism had been replaced by something more relaxed, more authentic. She moved through his shop like someone who was genuinely curious about how things worked, asking questions that suggested real interest rather than forced conversation. "Your son has good taste in cars," she said, discovering Tommy's toy collection on the workbench. "This looks like a 1967 Mustang." Mike looked up, surprised. "You know cars." Sophia's laugh had a self-deprecating edge. "My father was obsessed with them when I was growing up. I spent more Saturday mornings than I care to remember in garages that looked a lot like this one." She set the toy car down carefully. "I never thought I'd miss those mornings, but there's something about being here that brings it all back." "Is he still around, your father?" "Oh, yes," Sophia said, but her tone suggested complexity. "He's very much around. We don't talk about cars anymore. We don't talk about much of anything, really." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Sophia occasionally handing him tools or asking questions about what he was doing. Mike found himself appreciating her presence in ways that surprised him. She didn't try to fill every moment with conversation, didn't seem uncomfortable with the natural rhythms of mechanical work. Around noon, Tommy burst through the door with explosive energy. He stopped short when he saw Sophia, suddenly shy again, but his curiosity quickly overcame his bashfulness. "Are you still stuck here?" he asked with blunt directness. "Just until tomorrow," Sophia replied, crouching to his eye level. "Your dad is fixing my car. He's very good at what he does." Tommy beamed with pride. Dad can fix anything, he declared. He fixed my bike when the chain came off, and he made my treehouse, and he can even make pancakes that look like Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse pancakes? Sophia looked appropriately impressed. That's a very important skill. I could show you how, Tommy offered. Dad could make some for lunch if you want to stay. Mike felt his face warm with embarrassment. Tommy, I'm sure Sophia has other things to do. Actually, Sophia interrupted, Mickey Mouse pancakes sound absolutely perfect. If you're sure I wouldn't be imposing. 20 minutes later, they were crowded into the small apartment above the shop that Mike and Tommy called home. It wasn't much, a living room that doubled as Tommy's play area, a tiny kitchen, and bedrooms that were functional rather than fancy. But it was clean and comfortable and unmistakably a place where people lived and loved. Sophia moved through the space with careful attention, examining Tommy's artwork on the refrigerator, asking questions about the books on the shelves. The pancakes turned out better than Mike had expected, considering he was performing under watchful eyes. Tommy provided running commentary throughout the cooking process, explaining the precise technique required for properly shaped Mickey Mouse ears. As they ate, Sophia asked Tommy about school, his friends, his favorite subjects. She listened with the kind of focused attention that adults rarely gave to children's stories, asking follow-up questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. What do you do for work? Tommy asked between bites. I help companies figure out how to tell people about their products, Sophia explained. Like if someone makes a new kind of toy, I help them decide how to let kids know about it. That sounds fun. Do you get to play with the toys? Sometimes, Sophia admitted. Though most of the time I work with things that are less fun than toys. Computer programs, medical equipment, things like that. That's what Dad used to do. Tommy said. He made computer programs, but now he fixes cars because he likes it better. Mike caught Sophia's eye across the table, seeing a flicker of curiosity that suggested she'd filed this information away for later consideration. After lunch, as they prepared to return to work, Sophia surprised them with an announcement. I was thinking, if it's okay with you, I might stick around the shop this afternoon. I have some calls to make, and I could use the Wi-Fi to catch up on email. Mike found himself nodding before he'd fully processed the request. As they walked back down to the shop, Tommy skipping ahead, Mike caught himself stealing glances at Sophia, trying to figure out what it was about her that had so thoroughly disrupted his carefully maintained equilibrium. Maybe it was the way she'd listened to Tommy's stories as if they were fascinating. Maybe it was the genuine interest she'd shown in his work. Or maybe it was something simpler and more complicated. The unexpected pleasure of having someone to share lunch with, someone who looked at his modest life and seemed to see value rather than limitation. The afternoon stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and uncertainty, while the broken BMW waited patiently for parts that would either fix everything or change nothing at all. By Thursday afternoon, the alternator had arrived, and Mike found himself working slower than usual, taking extra care with each step. Once Sophia's car was fixed, she would drive away from Millbrook and return to whatever life was waiting for her in the city. The thought bothered him more than it should have. Sophia had spent the morning making phone calls, her voice taking on a crisp, professional tone that reminded Mike of the woman who had first stepped out of the BMW. But between calls, she would look up and catch his eye, offering a smile that seemed to bridge the gap between her business persona and the more relaxed version of herself. Tommy had insisted on coming straight to the shop after school to say goodbye, his backpack still bouncing as he burst through the door. Is Sophia's car all better now? He asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. Just about, Mike replied, tightening the last few bolts. Should have her back on the road within the hour. Sophia closed her laptop and walked over to where they were working. I can't believe how fast you got it done, she said, The dealership back home would have had me waiting at least a week. Small-town service, Mike said with a modest shrug. As Mike finished the final connections and prepared to test the repair, Sophia pulled out her phone to check messages. The device had been buzzing intermittently, but she'd been ignoring most calls. This time, however, something on the screen made her expression shift, her face tightening with anxiety. "Everything okay?" Mike asked. "It's my father," Sophia said, her voice carrying weight that hadn't been there moments before. "He's been calling all week. I've been avoiding him." She paused. "We don't have the easiest relationship." Tommy, with innocent directness, looked up from his toy car. "Why don't you like your dad?" "It's complicated," she told the boy gently. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, and it makes it hard for them to be close. My father and I, we see the world very differently." "But he's still your dad," Tommy pointed out with 8-year-old logic. Sophia's smile was wistful. "Yes, he is. And maybe that's enough reason to finally call him back." She looked at Mike. "Would you mind if I took this? It might take a few minutes." "Of course," Mike said, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening. Sophia stepped outside to make her call, leaving Mike and Tommy to finish the final tests. Through the shop windows, Mike could see her pacing in the parking lot, her free hand gesturing in ways that suggested the conversation was intense. Her body language shifted between defensive and conciliatory. "Dad?" Tommy's voice broke into Mike's observation. "Yeah, buddy? Do you think Sophia will come back and visit us sometime?" The question hit Mike harder than he'd expected. "I don't know," he said honestly. "She lives pretty far away, and she has a busy job." "I hope so," Tommy said. "I like her. She listens to me like you do." "I like her too," Mike admitted. "Are you going to marry her?" Tommy asked with casual directness. "Tommy, we barely know her," Mike said, though the words felt less true than they should have. Before Mike could figure out how to answer, Sophia reappeared in the doorway. Her face was flushed, and her eyes held a brightness that might have been tears or anger or both. She stood there for a moment, collecting herself, before walking back into the shop. "That was intense," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mike finished connecting the jumper cables and gestured for her to try starting the engine. The car turned over immediately, purring with smooth confidence. The sound should have been satisfying, but instead it felt like a countdown timer. "Sounds perfect," Sophia said, but her tone was distracted. As Mike began cleaning up his tools, Sophia wandered over to the bulletin board where she'd looked at photographs earlier. This time, her attention seemed drawn to the group photo from his old job, the one he'd moved toward the back but never quite managed to throw away. She studied it with focused attention that made Mike suddenly uncomfortable. "Mike?" she said slowly, her voice carrying a strange note. "This picture. Where was this taken?" "My old job," Mike replied, continuing to organize his tools. "Before I opened the shop." "What company?" Something in her tone made Mike look up. Sophia was staring at the photograph with an expression that had gone from curious to something closer to shock. Her face had lost most of its color. "Sterling Tech," Mike said, the words feeling heavy. "I was there for about 8 years until—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Sophia was no longer listening anyway. She was staring at the photograph with intensity that suggested she was seeing something that changed everything. When she finally turned to look at Mike, her eyes held disbelief, understanding, and something that looked like horror. "Sterling Tech," she repeated, barely above a whisper. My father is Richard Sterling." The wrench Mike had been holding clattered to the concrete floor. Tommy looked up from his toys, sensing the shift in atmosphere. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved, nobody seemed to breathe. Mike felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Sophia Sterling. Not just any Sterling, but Richard Sterling's daughter. The daughter of the man who had destroyed his career, his marriage, his carefully planned future. The daughter of the man whose signature had been on the termination letter that had sent Mike spiraling into the series of events that led him to this small town. "You know who I am," Sophia said, and it wasn't a question. Mike nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was racing through the implications, the connections, the sheer impossibility of Richard Sterling's daughter ending up broken down in his shop. "The phone call," Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger but strained. "He told me about you, about what happened 5 years ago, about the project that failed and the blame that got assigned." She paused, searching Mike's face. "He told me you were innocent, that the real problem was discovered months after you were fired, but by then the damage was done and you'd disappeared." Mike felt something crack open in his chest, a wound he'd thought had healed. "He told you that?" "He's been trying to find you for 3 years," Sophia said, tears flowing down her cheeks. "Ever since the truth came out. He wanted to make it right, to offer you your job back, to somehow undo what happened. But you'd changed your name when you moved here." The silence that followed felt enormous, filled with the weight of revelation and the cruel humor of a universe that specialized in bringing people together in the most complicated possible ways. Tommy had stopped playing entirely, watching the adults with wide-eyed awareness. "So when you helped me," Sophia said slowly, "when you were kind to me and let me stay and made me feel welcome, you knew who I was. You knew what my family had done to you." "No," Mike said quickly, finding his voice. "I didn't know. Not until just now. I had no idea who you were." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I helped you because that's what you do when someone needs help, because it was the right thing to do." Sophia stared at him with an expression that cycled through disbelief, wonder, and something that might have been hope. "You didn't know," she repeated. "All this time you had no idea that I was Richard Sterling's daughter." Mike finished. "No, if I had—" He stopped, realizing he honestly didn't know what he would have done. "What happens now?" Sophia asked, vulnerability clear in her voice. Before Mike could answer, Tommy spoke up with the clear voice of childhood, cutting through adult complexity. "Why does it matter who your dad is?" he asked Sophia. "You're still you, aren't you? And Dad's still Dad. So why can't you still be friends?" Both adults turned to look at the boy, who was regarding them with confusion that came from watching grown-ups make simple things complicated for no reason that made sense to an 8-year-old mind. Mike felt something shift inside him as he looked at his son, then at Sophia. Tommy was right. The past was the past, and the woman standing in his shop was not responsible for her father's actions. She was still the person who had listened to his son's stories with genuine interest, who had shared pancakes and laughter and quiet moments of connection. "Your son is pretty smart," Sophia said softly. "Yeah," Mike replied. "He gets that from his mother." The weak joke broke some of the tension. Sophia's laugh was shaky but genuine, and Mike felt some of the tightness in his chest begin to ease. "I should go," Sophia said, but she made no move towards the door. "This is too complicated, too much history." "Maybe," Mike said, surprising himself. "Or maybe it's exactly what it looks like. Two people who found something good together, despite everything that should have kept them apart." Sophia looked at him with eyes bright with tears and something else that looked like hope. "You really think that's possible?" Before Mike could answer, his phone rang with the sharp insistence of an emergency call. Mrs. Henderson's voice was shaky. "Mike, I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's been an accident. Someone hit a deer on Route 9, and they're asking for a tow truck." Mike glanced at Sophia, then at Tommy. "I'll be right there," he told Mrs. Henderson. "I have to go," he told Sophia. "Emergency call." "Of course," Sophia said, though she looked reluctant to leave things unresolved. "I should probably get going anyway. Back to the city, back to reality." "Your car's fixed," Mike said. "Should run perfectly now." "Thank you," Sophia said, and Mike could hear the weight of everything they weren't saying. For everything. As Mike prepared to leave, he found himself looking back at Sophia one more time, memorizing the way she looked standing in his shop. He had no idea what would happen next, whether this was goodbye forever or just goodbye for now, whether the revelation about her father would prove insurmountable or just another challenge they could work through. As Mike drove toward Route 9, he found himself hoping that when he returned, Sophia would still be there, ready to continue the conversation they'd barely begun. The accident turned out to be more complicated than initially described. By the time Mike had cleared the scene and returned to the shop, the sun was setting and the parking lot was empty except for his own truck. Sophia's BMW was gone. Mike sat in his pickup for a long moment, staring at the empty space where her car had been parked. He'd known she would leave eventually, but the timing felt like a particularly cruel twist of fate. They'd been on the verge of figuring out what came next, and now she was gone without even a proper goodbye. As he climbed the stairs to their apartment, Mike noticed an envelope that had been slipped under the door. His name was written on the outside in handwriting he recognized as Sophia's. "Dad?" Tommy called from the kitchen. "Is Sophia still downstairs?" "Nobody," Mike said, carefully opening the envelope. "She had to go back to the city." "Did she say goodbye?" Mike unfolded the letter inside, scanning the words that Sophia had written in careful, deliberate handwriting. "In a way," he said softly. "Mike, I'm sorry I couldn't wait for you to get back, but I was afraid that if I stayed any longer, I'd lose my nerve about what I need to do next. The past few days have been the most unexpected and wonderful surprise of my life, and learning the truth about who you are doesn't change that. If anything, it makes it more meaningful. My father has been carrying the guilt of what happened to you for 3 years. When I called him today and told him where I was, told him about the kind man who had helped me, he broke down crying. He said it felt like providence, like the universe was finally giving him a chance to make things right. I know you have every reason to be angry, to want nothing to do with anyone named Sterling. But I also know that the man who welcomed me into his shop and his home, who shared Mickey Mouse pancakes with a stranger, is someone who might be willing to consider forgiveness. Not for my father's sake, but for your own. I'm driving back to New York tonight to have the conversation with my father that I should have had years ago. About the business, about his priorities, about the kind of man he wants to be. I think it's time for both of us to stop running from difficult truths. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if you'll want to see me again after everything that's been revealed. But I hope that what we found together these past few days was real enough to survive the complications. If you're willing, I'd like to try. I'd like to see what might grow between us when it's not shadowed by secrets. I'd like to bring Tommy those toy cars I promised him and maybe learn to make Mickey Mouse pancakes myself. I've left my personal phone number at the bottom of this letter. If you decide you want to talk, really talk about all of this, please call. If you decide it's too complicated, I'll understand that too. Thank you for reminding me what kindness looks like, and for showing your son how to offer it freely to strangers who need it. Whatever happens next, I'll always be grateful for that. Sophia P.S. Please tell Tommy that meeting him was one of the best parts of these 3 days. Mike read the letter twice, then sat down heavily on the couch. Tommy appeared with his sandwich, taking one look at his father's expression and immediately climbing onto the couch beside him. "Are you sad that Sophia left?" Tommy asked. "A little," Mike admitted. "But also hopeful, I think." "Hopeful about what?" Mike looked down at his son, this remarkable little person who had learned to see the world with both clarity and compassion. "Hopeful that sometimes good things can come from complicated situations," Mike said. "And hopeful that people can forgive each other for mistakes, even big ones." "Is Sophia's dad the reason you had to leave your old job?" Mike nodded. "Yes, but it was an accident, really. He made a mistake, and I got blamed for it, and by the time everyone figured out what really happened, it was too late to fix things easily." "But you could fix them now, right? If you wanted to?" "Maybe," Mike said, "if everyone involved was willing to try." "Are you going to call her?" Mike looked at the phone number at the bottom of Sophia's letter, then at his son's expectant face, then out the window toward the highway that led away from Millbrook and toward whatever future might be waiting. "I think I might," he said finally. "What do you think about that?" Tommy's grin was immediate and brilliant. "I think Sophia makes really good pancakes," he said. "And I think she likes us. And I think maybe sometimes people come into your life exactly when you need them to, even if you don't know you need them yet." Mike pulled his son into a hug, marveling at the depth of insight that children could offer when adults were too caught up in complications to see clearly. Tommy was right. Sophia had appeared in their lives exactly when they needed her, not just because Mike had been lonely, but because all of them needed to learn something about forgiveness, second chances, and the possibility that the worst things that happened to you might lead to the best things if you were brave enough to let them. As Tommy settled against his side and began chattering about his day, Mike found himself looking at Sophia's phone number again. He would call, he decided. Not tonight, but soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe this weekend, but definitely before too much time passed and courage gave way to caution. Outside their window, Millbrook settled into evening quiet. But now, instead of feeling like a refuge from the complications of the larger world, it felt like a launching pad, a place strong enough to serve as home base for whatever adventures might come next. The broken-down BMW was gone, but the woman who had emerged from it had left something behind. The possibility that the life Mike had built from the pieces of his previous disappointments might not be an ending after all, but a beginning. The possibility that sometimes the universe's sense of humor was actually kindness in disguise. The possibility that the best was yet to come. 6 months later, on a Saturday morning that felt like spring's official announcement, Mike found himself standing in his shop, watching Tommy explain carburetor maintenance to a woman in designer jeans, who was listening with the kind of focused attention that made his son stand taller with pride. Sophia had kept her promise about the toy cars, bringing Tommy an entire collection that now occupied a place of honor on the workbench. She'd also kept her promise about learning to make Mickey Mouse pancakes, though Mike had to admit her version was considerably more artistic than his utilitarian approach. What neither of them had quite expected was how naturally she would fit into the rhythms of their life in Millbrook, or how eagerly the small town would embrace someone who clearly cared about one of their own. The conversation with her father had gone better than anyone had expected. Richard Sterling had spent 3 years learning to live with regret, and was eager for the chance to make amends. Mike had turned down the job offer, but accepted the consulting contract that allowed him to work on interesting projects from his shop while maintaining the life he'd built. It was the best of both worlds, intellectual challenge combined with community connections. "Dad," Tommy called from across the shop, "Sophia wants to know if we can go fishing after lunch." "If it's okay with your father," Sophia added, though her eyes were already sparkling with anticipation. Mike looked at his son, whose happiness had become even brighter over the past few months, and at the woman who had somehow managed to love both of them exactly as they were while inspiring them to become even better versions of themselves. The future stretched ahead of them, full of ordinary Saturday afternoons and extraordinary possibilities, all of it built on the foundation of 3 days when a broken-down car had brought them together. "Fishing sounds perfect," Mike said, and meant it completely. Outside, Millbrook dozed in the spring sunshine, a small town where big hearts had made room for new love and second chances, where forgiveness had proven stronger than resentment, and where a struggling single dad and a city girl had discovered that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built together, one act of kindness at a time.